This is a matrix where fear of death and fear in general dominate our lives. Fear of death being the strongest implant we have, according to the wingmakers. We are being abused by our parents, our friends, our co-workers and bosses, our government, and by society in general. Some of us realize that this is not how it's supposed to be, and we start looking for answers. Now, here we are. We start our journey, and most commonly we first realize that something is corrupted. So we stumble upon the Illuminati and their puppet governments and institutions, and we find that the few are controlling the many. After that, many of us get into the UFO phenomenon and realize that humans are not alone on this planet, in cosmos and in the near Earth space. So far so good. We can still look at these things as something separate from us, and we can do it from a computer or read about it in books. It feels safe. Then some of us go further and begin to explore higher levels of truth and possibilities, until one day something quite uncomfortable starts to happen. We realized that the only solution to all these problems lie within ourselves. The stage is no longer out there, and instead we find ourselves being the actors who need to resolve this. No one else will. The moment of truth hits us like a bomb, and we understand that we are responsible for our own future. There is no one there to save or help us. This is a moment of uncomfortable clarity, and some of us are willing to take on this responsibility, while others are not. Many will get angry and blame circumstances or others for the situation they're in. Although these circumstances might be true, fact remains. It is what it is, and we need to face that if we want to change things to the better, it needs to come from within ourselves. It doesn't matter whom we blame, because sooner or later we have no choice but to conclude that we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are our own saviors. This is a tough pill to swallow. Too many times have I seen people in the spiritual field who are gung-ho on the fact that this matrix is a trap and we need to exit. These people are very determined. However, when it really dawns on them that they need to do it themselves, they back off and start to look at information elsewhere. Information where there might be some kind of savior involved, so they don't need to take the responsibility that's required. Thus, they leave the path they were on and choose what they think is the easy way out, when in fact they are deceiving themselves. This is understandable because we all have a lot of fear inside, but it's this exact fear that is our worst enemy. If we don't face this fear, how can we ever get out of the trap? We're not saying that we can magically get rid of the fear, but we need to acknowledge that we are inhibited by fear, and we need to accept that. Only then can we start putting our fear aside and soberly look at what we really want to do. This is so important, or we might not be able to exit through the grid. A typical example is out-of-body experiences, OBEs. The real reason most people can't have OBEs is because of fear of leaving the body. It reminds them of death, which is humanity's strongest fear. One day a person might be able to finally have an OBE, but he or she will encounter some strange being when outside the body, and what happens then? He or she immediately, out of fear, returns to the safety of their own body, and that's the end of that OBE. The above example is a good one because if we can't face that fear, how can we make a fearless decision when our bodies die? We might feel very brave now, sitting in front of our computers, but will we be as brave when we are facing the reality of having to make a choice to exit through the grid? Take some time to think about this. We'd like to ask a few questions. and we think it's important that each person who listens to this video will honestly ask themselves these questions, because they are very important. Here are the questions. If you become terminally ill tomorrow, let's say you have leukemia, and a doctor told you that you will die, unless you exchange your blood with nanobots, will you choose death, or will you take the doctor's offer and maybe live forever? You have liver cancer, and a new nanobot liver will save your life. Will you do it? If you are young or middle-aged, having children, and suddenly find out you have a terminal illness, would you get a nanobot transplant that will save your life for the sake of your children, or would you choose the regular route and die from your illness? Would the fear of the unknown stop you in the last minute from exiting the grid? Are you still willing to take the risk of going through the grid, or will you hesitate and maybe choose the tunnel after all, hoping everything you learned about the between life area, BLA, and the grid was a lie? If you are on your way towards a hole in the grid, and a very beloved dead relative shows up, telling you how much they've missed you and how wonderful it is to see you again, would that stop you? At first you might doubt that it really is your relative, because you learned in your life on earth that it's a deception. But then this relative becomes very convincing and emotional, and he or she starts talking about all the wonderful times you had together. Will that make you change your mind and instead follow the relative? But anything you have here on earth when you die, human relations or material things alike, stop you from leaving the matrix for good? What about if Jesus approaches you and tells you that what you learned here on earth on your spiritual journey is false, and that you have been deceived, also taking into the account that he's very convincing? Will you have the willpower to tell him that you are not interested? What would you do if someone who seems very benevolent and trustworthy tells you they want to help you going through the grid? Would you leave the responsibility to this being, or would you ignore them and just continue on your own, even if you are afraid and or uncertain? Ask yourself honestly why you want to leave the matrix. Do you want to leave because you're traumatized, fearful and angry? Or do you want to leave because you realize that this is not your home, and this is nothing more, there is nothing more for you here, and that you can be of better use elsewhere? If it's the former, we would suggest you handle your trauma and fear, or you will not be able to make a rational decision when the time comes. Fear almost always takes over. If you see the tunnel or a bright light, and you feel more love and bliss than you've ever felt before, and start getting drawn to it, will you still ignore it and continue toward the grid? When you die and leave your body, you might experience a relief and some gradient of euphoria, because you no longer have the burden of the body and the physical world. Will you then change your mind, thinking that life maybe wasn't so bad after all, and it could be worth going back to help out? This would be like taking heroin, thinking there are no problems in the world that you can't handle. You are on top of it. Some of the above questions might sound silly and irrelevant when we sit in the safety of our home before a computer, but we want you to really ransack yourself and honestly ask yourself all these questions. In other words, can you bypass all these temptations without any problem and just ignore them, even the ones that are making you sad? When your body expires and you leave, and you encounter some scary creatures in the astral, maybe even the devil, will you freeze from fear, or are you able to just ignore them and continue on your path? Again, if you think you would freeze and get terrified, you need to work on your fears. We are not saying that you will encounter this, but if you do. Most of the time, if you encounter terrifying creatures in the astral, They are manifestations of your own fear, your self-created thought forms. It's important that we ask ourselves these questions now and not when our bodies have already expired. We need to have a plan and be absolutely certain about what we want. Many people might think they are, but when it comes down to it, they notice that they weren't. We humans have an easy time deceiving ourselves and each other here on Earth, and therefore, how easy wouldn't it be to be deceived by someone in the astral? Think about this, it's very important. It requires great bravery to leave this matrix and enter the unknown. We believe we have a fairly good grasp of what will happen after we exit, which was discussed in the Wes Penre papers, WPP, but we don't know everything and we have no first-hand experience. Therefore, it's a judgment call. Are you willing to go from the frying pan into the fire if worse comes to worse? Or would you choose to surrender to another journey here on Earth? Which way is stronger for you personally? If you are in doubt, you need to conquer your fears, or there is a great chance that you make a decision that you wouldn't have made if you put your fears aside. Although we are all being traumatized in this matrix and have seen all the insanity, it's still a good idea to feel gratitude rather than fear. Let's pretend that we had everything we wanted in this life, and let's say that what we wanted was a wonderful relationship, wonderful children, riches, a relaxed and fulfilling life, freedom and joy. In other words, we had the best thinkable lifetime here on Earth. Wouldn't that be a curse? If we had a lifetime like that, we wouldn't be in a need of change. Why would we want to change anything if we have all we need and more? We would never have come this far in our spiritual development, and we would be in grave danger of going towards the machine kingdom with most other people on the planet if we had everything we wanted. Instead, we have experienced hardship and abuse, which became our catalyst, and now we're ready to graduate. We don't want to persuade anybody while making these decisions. This is a personal journey for each individual, and only you know what feels right to you. These are questions we are asking ourselves. Because we think this video is so important and has so many questions, we will post a transcript for free at wespenre.com/video/transcripts. You can download the PDF file there. Please feel free to discuss this video in the comment section.